Today, I'm going to see if I can help out an old childhood landmark of mine. What's happening, Panda Nation? Peter Von Panda out here in the great outdoors, an area that I don't get to spend as much time as I would like to, or that I used to. So one of the things that I did here was I jumped in my car and headed all the way from Chicago back to my hometown of Detroit, Michigan, because my childhood Boy Scout summer camp has been struggling a little bit lately, and I wanted to be able to help out. And so I made the 5-hour trek and drove all the way back. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about D-Bar Scout Ranch and my time there and why I came back to help them out. So the place I'm talking about is actually D-Bar Scout Ranch, and it's actually a ranch, 1,800 acres. They have or had horses and cattle when I was a kid. Now it is just down to horses, but that's why it's still a ranch. So they actually have wranglers and horseback riding and a lot of equestrian activities, as well as the other camp type of stuff. But that's why it's technically a ranch instead of a camp. Now, D-Bar is actually about an hour north of Detroit. So even from the suburbs, it will take you about an hour to get there. So it's pretty close. It's very accessible for a lot of people, but it's still far away enough that it feels like it's a little bit of a trip. And it's a very rural area. Metamora, Michigan is a small town, although now that I've been back, it's been about 20 years since I've been back to the camp. Metamora is definitely a bigger town, but still pretty rural in terms of most of the towns that you're probably familiar with. Now, actually, I spent time at D-Bar Scout Ranch in a couple of capacities, and the first one is as a scouter. So when I was in Cub Scouts and then Boy Scouts, we spent a week up here doing summer camp activities, and it was a lot of fun. And one of the stories that I remember very vividly from this is that we were actually doing some of the ranch activities, and we were all horseback riding, and there's a trail called the Pedro Trail. I think it's actually the longest trail here at D-Bar, and it meanders through the woods. It's very scenic. But there are many places where it is just a very narrow trail, trees on either side. It's kind of like a walking path. And so we were all single file line riding horses. And most of the time you have a wrangler at the front and back that are just kind of pacing the whole thing. So it's pretty slow. It's pretty comfortable. Pretty much everyone at every skill level can enjoy it. Now, I am just sitting there enjoying my ride very leisurely. And then all of a sudden I hear the bump of hoofs. And what ends up happening is on my right side, my friend and troop mate, Andy Dillon, comes zooming by at full gallop right along the side of the trail, kind of brushing against the trees, and just cruises right by all of the horses and just takes off. And in an instant, I can't see him because there's so much foliage. But what I do see is at the front of our caravan, the wrangler takes off after Andy at a full gallop. He obviously catches up with him. We catch up with him later, and I say to Andy, "Why did you take off like that, dude? That was so funny." And he's like, "I don't know what I did. The horse just had a mind of its own." Took off at a full gallop, and he said he was terrified the whole time. He was like, "I was holding on for dear life, dude. I thought I was going to be thrown off." So that was one of the things that I remembered about riding the horses. I also remember one of the pieces of advice: never walk behind the horse, because if they kick, you aren't going to like it. So I've never done that. Plus, I don't like being too close to the rear end of a horse to begin with. Now, the other way that I spent time up here at camp was as a camp counselor. For one summer, I actually worked up here. It was 8 weeks, and you would have campers up here for the full week. And I was hired to work up here on the archery range. So that's where I spent most of my summer, helping people put up targets, helping them understand the bow and the arrow, watching a lot of people shoot arrows at anything but the target itself. So shooting sports was my area for the summer, and I really enjoyed it. Met a lot of good people. We got to eat in the mess hall every day for every meal that I also got a chance to eat in tonight again. And I remember it being very cold sometimes and very hot sometimes. Stayed in a cabin with my footlocker that was not obviously air conditioned, and I was paid $54 a week. So my bi-weekly paycheck was $108. Now, you might be saying that's not a lot of money, and technically that is less than minimum wage, but it's my understanding that they were able to pay it because they are providing you room and board. The room was minimal, the board was okay. Lots of Kool-Aid and comfort food. But I enjoyed it. But one of the stories that I remember from being up there was there was a lake actually really close to our cabin. So a lot of us counselors that lived in that cabin next to the lake would jump in the lake, cool off, relax a little bit before dinner. So that was really convenient to have. But in our area, there are a lot of box turtles, all these little painted box turtles. They're kind of cute. A lot of people have them as pets. And sometimes when you would walk around the lake, you would see the turtles hustle for the water, right? Try to avoid the people. And I don't know that it was a lot of fun, but it was just something to do. That when you saw one of the turtles scurry for the lake, you went after it and just tried to catch it and show it off before you released it back into the lake. But one time there was a pretty big box turtle, and a couple guys went after it, and they caught it because it was moving very slowly, and they brought it back up, and one of the guys said, "Dude, that's not a box turtle, that's a snapping turtle." And this guy was pretty big, about 1.5 feet long. I mean, it was the biggest turtle I had ever seen in person up to that point, and it absolutely was a biter. And we were all fascinated with it. It obviously looks a little bit different than a box turtle, but I remember one of the guys like poking with a stick, and it just snapped that stick in half, dude. And I didn't even know there were snapping turtles in Michigan. Apparently there are. I'm sure there are different types of snapping turtles. But anyway, after we played around with it, we just released it back into the lake, and that was the last time I went swimming in that lake for the summer, because I was like, dude, I don't want to come out of the lake with less than 10 toes. So anyway, that just made me realize, dude, there's a lot of wildlife out there. So as you can see, I had a lot of good memories here, and I was really excited about coming back. In many ways, I go back to some place and I'm like, wow, this has really changed a lot. And in other places I go back and I'm like, this place hasn't changed at all. And pulling in and brought back so many memories. In fact, there's a really long dirt drive to get into the ranch, and they actually have the Scout Law signs up, and that has been there as long as I've been a camper. Now, it looks like these signs are pretty new, so they look a little more polished and actually a little more professionally done than the signs I remember, but it's just fun to see some of those things that have been around forever still persist, and it kind of brings you back to the good old days when you were a kid and carefree and didn't have any worries and wondering if I paid my property tax bill. However, like many things from our childhood, like your corded phone and VHS player, and maybe your fandom of Pepsi Free, a lot of things start to disappear on you, and the DeBarre Scout Ranch is no different. Now, although it's still up and running, obviously it's kind of running into some hard times here, and the big one is just the decline in attendance, and a big part of that is just the lower participation rates in the Boy Scouts, right? So when I was a kid, it still wasn't a super popular thing to do, but, you know, people did it. People did it all the way through high school. I had friends that we were in the same troop until we turned 18. But now it's not so popular. In fact, you can really see it in the attendance. So when I was a camp counselor, there were 8 weeks of summer camp. Now there are only 2 weeks of summer camp. That's all that they can get up here in terms of kids. And one of the things I was thinking about is when I was a camp counselor, dude, you needed 2 or 3 weeks to kind of find your feet. So I feel like when you only have 2 weeks, everything's going to be a little helter-skelter. But at least the kids are getting up here, and there's still an opportunity for them to experience the ranch and do some horseback riding. The other way that you can really tell is that the cabins up here, and I didn't check them all out, but they are in a lot of disrepair. In fact, some of them that have been painted and they have tried to do the maintenance as much as possible on them look okay, but the rafters are falling down. There's a lot of weathered patches. A lot of the wood paneling is rotting away. I've heard inside that a lot of them are a mess, that they're sinking, that the concrete is cracking, and all sorts of stuff. You know, all of these cabins used to have a latrine outside, and now obviously the more modern thing is to have indoor plumbing and have a toilet and a bathroom inside, so they want to try to do that. But even the simplest things, changing the fluorescent lights to LED lights, and even the exterior spotlights from the halogen lights to LED lights, still hasn't been done because that costs money. In fact, I know that it costs money when I replace my LED light bulbs. They're $12, and I used to pay $1 for those incandescent ones, but when you're replacing thousands of those, it gets pretty expensive. And so just doing some of the things that you might expect is probably pretty hard, but obviously doing some of the bigger infrastructure repairs is pretty hard. So that's obviously a big drain. You're always going to have maintenance, regardless if you got people coming up or not. The weather in Michigan is just really tough on facilities. And the biggest thing that I can tell you that I recognize that they don't do is when I was up here, they used to have steer, I guess longhorn. I'm not actually sure what the difference is between them all, but longhorns, and they used to have horses. I think somewhere between 50 and 80 horses in the summer when I was a camp counselor, and now I think they have about 30 horses, so they just need less horses. But they don't have the longhorns up here. And the reason that I remember that so much is that they just used to have them out grazing. You could see them, you could stand up at the fence and take a gander, but they were such an integral part of summer camp, an iconic piece, that they are part of the logo of DeBarre. So the logo has the longhorn skull on it, and obviously, you know, a lot of people won't even know what that's a reference to now because they don't even have them, because I guess they're just kind of money pits, right? They just eat and graze, and I don't know that you sell them off for beef. I don't know, maybe you do, but you don't make a lot of money. So right now they don't even have those. It's just the horses, and kind of a limited amount of horses too. So the camp has been in decline. Boy Scouts have been in decline. And I know that the camp is struggling a little bit. And I was kind of made aware of this because they have been making a lot of adjustment. And one of the ways they're trying to survive right now is by repurposing some of the buildings. So obviously with a bunch of cabins on the premises and some of the administration buildings and things like this, they don't need as much. So one of the things that I noticed when I arrived was when you get to the parking lot, there's a building right there. And that actually used to be the registration, administration, and trading post. So when you arrived at camp, you would go in there, check in, they would give you a map to where your campsite was, it would tell you what's going on. There was a trading post there so you could buy memorabilia, some foodstuffs, candy, those types of things. And that place was packed. There were maybe half a dozen people working there. It was kind of always busy getting people in, handling requests, telling parents where to go if they wanted to see their kids and all that. And now there just isn't really the need for that. One, the electronic online check-in stuff makes it a lot easier. But then two, the staff is just a fraction of what it used to be. I think they only have 4 or 5 or 6 people up there in terms of full-time staff and a lot of volunteers. But that building actually is now a Scout museum. So while it's not necessarily staffed, they have it filled with stuff that's been donated, so you can go there and see some of the old scouting history, which was kind of fun. I've never seen it before. I've never seen the building gutted and turned into the museum, so I always remembered it as administration building. I totally didn't even know that they made that change. But I get that they have that building and they're trying to repurpose it and use it for something else. The other thing that they do is they invite in other groups. So obviously when I was growing up, this was a Boy Scout ranch. They really only used it for Boy Scouting activities. But obviously with this extra capacity, they're opening it up to other youth groups and church groups and things like this. In fact, they actually still do the Pedro Trail horseback riding route. And actually, one of the people told me about the deal that they have. It's actually like $20 to do the trail if you have your own horse, but it's $50 if you want DBRA to provide you a horse. And someone was telling me that that's actually a really great deal. $50 to have the horse for the full day is actually a really great rental rate, because most places will charge you $100 to rent a horse for half a day or a full day. So you're getting it at half price, and you're getting to see the whole camp, tour the whole camp, ride around on the longest trail, most scenic trail that they have here. So if you're actually looking for a good money hack and entertaining activity in the outdoors, then check that one out. The other thing that they are doing is that they are part of something called mitten events. And so Michigan is like a mitten, like a hand, and there's some sort of company that kind of finds some out of the way places, some of the places that are a little more unique, some of the places that wouldn't be open otherwise to other activities, and they will do events here. So they're actually having a wedding here next weekend, I think, actually in the mess hall, which is kind of interesting. So if you really want kind of a down and dirty, rustic event, this is definitely the place to have it. You definitely don't want to be one of those people that's overly fussy about all the fixtures and leaking faucets and all that. But I definitely can see how people can enjoy that, because it's really beautiful out here. There's some really great terrain and some really nice scenery, and obviously a bunch of lakes as well. So they are participating in that, and that's really to bring in some extra money as well. The other thing they're doing is they are starting to lease out some land, and I think it's about half of the ranch at this point. Now, it's kind of my understanding that when they did have the Longhorns here, they would actually farm a lot of this land themselves to create enough hay to feed the other animals through the winter. And so it's not like that land would be used for scouting activities otherwise. It probably would be farmed, but because they just don't have as many cattle or horses anymore, they don't need to grow as much hay. And so that land is kind of unused. And so what they are doing is they are leasing that to farmers and collecting some rents to help offset some of the costs. So it's actually a really good idea. And in fact, the mess hall kind of sits on the top of a little hill, and you can actually see kind of down in the valley in the flatlands where they are doing some of that farming. So you can see that going on. I think it's a good option for collecting some income on the land that you wouldn't normally use. And it's pretty out of the way. The farming industry doesn't necessarily have huge margins either. But knowing all this and knowing that I had really good times up here, one of the things that I wanted to do was help out, and, obviously you could send in money or, recruit some kids to come up to summer camp up here. But one of the things that they had, and was kind of good for me too, was a fun little evening called like the Steak and Shakedown. And basically this is the 3rd year they've done it. But what they will do is they will just barbecue some steaks. You'll have a nice dinner in the mess hall. They'll kind of give you an update of what's going on with the camp. And the money that is raised from that dinner will then be deployed to something that the attendees vote on. So you get to make a little bit of a contribution. It's kind of a nice little windfall for the camp that helps get them some of the equipment or some of the funding that they need. There weren't a lot of people there. I wish there were more. There was certainly extra space for people, but it's $100 to go to this dinner. I don't know what it costs to put on the dinner, $20 per person. There's no alcohol allowed on the camp, so there were no alcoholic drinks, which is actually a good way to save money. But they did start out with a nice salad and some bread, and then they had the steaks and a baked potato with it, as well as some green beans. And then they had a nice like chocolate and cherry cake as well, and then all the soda and drinks and pop that you wanted. But the nice thing about it was while you were having dinner, they were doing some presentations on some of the things that they really needed. And they were kind of talking about everything from laser levels so that they could repair the rafters on some of the buildings here, to horse pads, to what ended up getting approved was the Wrangler helmets. So what I'm not surprised about is that there are rules now that Wranglers have to wear helmets. And in many cases, a Wrangler would just wear a cowboy hat, right? But now everyone's got to wear a helmet. I wonder if they're doing that out in Montana. I wonder if the cowboys out there are wearing helmets too. But they do make actually a Wrangler helmet that looks like a cowboy hat, or is a cowboy hat, but around the bucket portion of the hat, it's actually a helmet. It looks a little thicker, it looks a little different than just a regular cowboy hat, but it provides that protection in case the Wrangler falls. It also helps identify the Wrangler from the other riders, because the other riders will just have like a skull helmet. So you can see that the people with the cowboy hats, they are the ones in charge and the ones guiding you. So those are apparently pretty expensive. So they said that they really wanted those to keep the Wranglers feeling like Wranglers and to keep the participants feeling like they're with Wranglers. So that's the option that got the most votes and ended up getting funded that evening, which is really nice. Then they had some door prizes. And so some people walked away with DBRA mugs like this guy. And some people won a fishing pole and some other things like that. So it was a really nice evening. All in all, it was only a couple hours long, but it was a good way to kind of get back to the camp. A lot of us are just older. We're not going to do the camping itself, but we wanted to see the camp. They actually told people there was plenty of light left, that you could leave after dinner and actually drive around and see the camp. But 10-mile-per-hour speed limit, that's to keep the kids safe. But they actually said that the good thing about that particular weekend was that every cabin campsite, not every campsite, but every cabin campsite was booked for the weekend. So that was really good that troops were up there taking advantage of the nice weather here and getting a little camping in, and not necessarily having to pitch tents, but just being out there and enjoying it and doing a little canoeing and whatnot. So obviously something like that helps them a little bit, but we're only talking a few $1,000s. So it's obviously not going to change the fortunes of the camp. It's obviously not going to bring in the participants that they need in the long term. But what I hope is that the camp starts to find stability. I hope a lot of the people that enjoyed a lot of the childhood experiences there, like I did, and even as a counselor, would, be able to come back to something like this. It's kind of an easy way to actually have a good time yourself, relive those memories over the course of a few hours, get an update on a camp that's close to people, see it, see what people are doing, see how it's changed, see how it has stayed the same. And hopefully the camp finds its stability. And hopefully as you just get more of the alumni and the current participants to participate, that they find kind of a level where they can be sustainable at. So obviously, if you want to help out DBRA, I'm sure they would be happy to take your money if you just want to send in a check or make a donation. But obviously, a fundraiser dinner like this takes a little effort to put on, but they seem to really appreciate it. But everyone that I met was super friendly and super optimistic about what could happen with the camp. And so I'm hoping to get back next year and continue to make a tradition out of this, and maybe even invite some of my old fellow campers back to join me so that we can experience camp once again for at least a few hours, as well as give back to the people that want to go up and take advantage of it right now as scouts. So if you're in the Michigan area and want to check out DBRA, you don't have to be a scouter anymore to experience it. I'll put a link to that in the description below. And hopefully we can preserve some more of these places so that the future generations can have the childhoods that we had as well. Peter Von Pan, out.